There is a strange misunderstanding that quietly follows many men through their relationships. They grow up believing attraction begins at the obvious moments. They think connection starts when two people finally sit close enough, touch long enough, or reach some dramatic romantic moment that movies have trained everyone to expect. But real life rarely works that way. Because long before intimacy appears on the surface, something deeper has already been happening underneath, and most people never notice it. Think about it. Have you ever met someone and felt comfortable around them almost immediately, while another person could say all the right things and somehow still feel distant? It is difficult to explain because attraction is not only built through words. Human beings are constantly reading signals that happen beneath awareness, small behaviors, small moments, tiny details that seem meaningless on their own. And those details often decide everything. A man can spend hours trying to impress someone. He can carefully choose what to say, try to sound confident, try to appear interesting, successful, funny, or mysterious. Meanwhile, another man walks into the room and creates a stronger connection without doing much at all. Why? Because people remember how they feel around someone more than they remember what that person said. Imagine a simple moment. A couple sits together after a long day. Nothing dramatic is happening, no grand gestures, no perfect cinematic music playing in the background. She talks about something that happened at work. Maybe she is frustrated. Maybe she is excited. Maybe she is describing something small that most people would barely pay attention to. And many men make a mistake without realizing it. They immediately switch into problem-solving mode. They interrupt. They explain. They fix. They think helping means providing solutions. But sometimes people are not searching for solutions. Sometimes they are searching for understanding. And the difference between those two things changes relationships completely. Because emotional connection often begins when someone feels seen. Not observed, not judged. Seen. There is a huge difference. Everyone has experienced moments where they talked and felt like nobody was truly listening. The other person nodded at the right times, looked interested, said the expected words, but something felt empty. Now think of the opposite experience. Think about someone remembering a small detail you mentioned weeks ago. Think about someone noticing your mood changed before you even said anything. Think about someone making you feel important without trying to impress you. Those moments stay in memory. Psychologists have spent years studying why human beings attach emotionally to certain people, and one thing appears again and again. Trust does not grow through intensity. It grows through consistency. That surprises many people because modern culture often teaches the opposite. It tells people attraction must be loud, fast, exciting, dramatic. But strong connections are usually quieter than that. They are built through repeated experiences where a person feels emotionally safe. Safety sounds boring until you understand what it really means. Safety does not mean predictable. Safety does not mean weak. Safety means someone can relax around you without feeling pressure. Because people spend most of their lives performing. At work, they perform. Around strangers, they perform. On social media, they perform. Even around friends, they sometimes perform. Very few people feel free enough to simply exist. And when someone creates that feeling, it becomes powerful. Now imagine another situation. A man sits across from a woman during a conversation. He wants her attention so badly that he starts trying too hard. He talks constantly. He fills every silence. He becomes nervous whenever a quiet moment appears. But silence itself carries its own language. Confident people understand this. They do not panic when conversations breathe. They allow moments to exist naturally. Because rushing often communicates anxiety, while presence communicates confidence. And human beings are incredibly sensitive to emotional energy. People can feel when someone is trying to force a connection. They can also feel when someone is comfortable enough to let connection happen naturally. That difference matters because attraction rarely grows under pressure. It grows in space. Space for curiosity, space for comfort, space for anticipation. Think about your favorite memories with people you cared about. Many of them probably were not extraordinary moments. Maybe it was a random late-night conversation. Maybe it was laughing at something stupid. Maybe it was sitting together while doing almost nothing at all. What made those moments powerful was not the activity. It was the feeling attached to it. Human beings are emotional creatures who later invent logical explanations for emotions they already felt. That is why someone can technically do everything right and still fail to create a connection. And another person can do very little and somehow become unforgettable. Because connection is less about performance and more about presence. The strange thing is that people spend years chasing complicated answers while ignoring simple truths. They try to become more attractive by changing their appearance. They try to become more impressive by collecting achievements. They believe if they reach some future version of themselves, connection will suddenly become easy. But often the qualities people remember most are much simpler. Patience, attention, listening, calmness, authenticity, the ability to make another person feel understood. And maybe that is the lesson many people spend years learning. Because at the end of the day, attraction may catch attention, but connection is what stays. People forget perfect lines. People forget rehearsed performances. People forget attempts to impress. But they rarely forget how someone made them feel. And maybe that changes everything. Because the strongest connections were never built by trying to control outcomes. They were built by learning how to understand people. And understanding people begins by realizing that every person is silently asking the same question. Do I feel safe being myself around you? The answer to that question often decides more than anyone realizes. There is something most people misunderstand about attraction, and it quietly changes the way relationships begin before they even realize it. People often assume attraction happens in one dramatic moment. They imagine some perfect line, some perfect touch, some secret move that suddenly flips a switch inside another person's mind. They believe there must be a hidden formula that creates chemistry instantly. But real life rarely works that way. The strongest connections usually begin in places so small that most people completely miss them. A look that lasts 1 second longer than expected. A pause during a conversation that suddenly feels comfortable instead of awkward. A moment where someone realizes they do not feel pressure around another person. And strangely enough, those tiny moments often become more powerful than grand gestures. A man walks into a cafe to meet someone he has been talking to for a few weeks. Nothing dramatic happens. There is no movie scene, no music playing in the background, no perfect line delivered at exactly the right time. They sit across from each other and start talking. At first, both are doing what almost everyone does. They are trying to make a good impression. They are choosing words carefully. They are thinking about how they sound. They are wondering whether the other person likes them. Then something slowly changes. The conversation becomes easier. The pauses no longer feel uncomfortable. Neither person feels like they are performing anymore. And that is where something interesting begins. Because attraction is often less about creating excitement and more about removing tension. People spend so much time trying to create sparks that they forget something important. Human beings naturally move toward people who make them feel emotionally safe. Safety sounds boring when people hear it for the first time. They imagine routine, predictability, something ordinary. But emotional safety is not ordinary. Emotional safety is the feeling of not having to defend yourself. It is the feeling that you can relax. It is the feeling that you do not have to calculate every word before speaking. Psychologists have noticed something fascinating about human connection. People become more open around those who make them feel understood rather than judged. It sounds simple, but in reality, very few people create that feeling. Most people are trying too hard. They are trying to impress, trying to prove themselves, trying to force attraction into existence. But connection usually develops differently. Think about moments people remember years later. Rarely do they say, "I remember the expensive dinner." Rarely do they say, "I remember the perfect thing they said." Instead, they remember small emotional moments. They remember feeling calm. They remember feeling seen. They remember feeling comfortable without understanding why. A person can sometimes communicate reassurance without saying a single word. Even simple gestures can carry emotional meaning when they happen naturally and respectfully. A gentle presence beside someone. A hand placed lightly during a moment of support. Small signals that say, "You're okay. I'm here." Because human beings are constantly reading emotional information that never gets spoken out loud, and most of it happens below conscious awareness. Someone leans closer during conversation. Someone relaxes their shoulders. Someone smiles without realizing it. Someone mirrors another person's movements. People often think attraction begins in the mind, but the body notices things long before logic catches up. Imagine a woman having an exhausting week. Work problems, family stress, endless responsibilities pulling her attention in 10 different directions. Then she spends time with someone who creates calm instead of pressure. Someone who listens instead of competing. Someone who notices instead of demanding attention. Without realizing it, her entire body begins relaxing. Her posture changes. Her energy shifts. The tension starts disappearing. And that feeling becomes associated with the person sitting across from her. Not because of manipulation, not because of tricks, because people naturally move toward experiences that feel emotionally good. This is where many people make mistakes. They confuse intensity with connection. Intensity can feel exciting in the beginning. Uncertainty creates adrenaline. Mixed signals create emotional highs and lows. But excitement alone does not build closeness. Closeness is built through repeated moments of trust. Trust develops quietly. It develops when words match actions. It develops when people feel heard. It develops when someone realizes they do not have to pretend. Think about friendships that became strong over time. Nobody sat down and forced trust into existence. Trust appeared through countless moments that seemed small at the time. A conversation after a difficult day. A message asking if someone got home safely. Remembering details others forget. Showing consistency when it matters. Relationships often work the same way. The problem is that modern culture convinces people that attraction must be immediate and dramatic. Everything feels fast. People want instant chemistry, instant attachment, instant certainty. But human connection usually moves slower than people want, and slower does not mean weaker. Sometimes slower means stronger. Because when people stop chasing shortcuts, they begin noticing something surprising. Real attraction often grows. It expands. It deepens. At first, someone simply enjoys another person's company. Then they start looking forward to conversations. Then they feel comfortable sharing things they normally keep hidden. Then they realize they miss that person when they are not around, and suddenly, something that seemed small becomes important. Not because one moment created everything, because hundreds of moments quietly built something underneath the surface. Moving through these experiences, it becomes clear that intimacy is not limited to a single moment or location. It develops gradually. It grows through awareness, through patience, through understanding subtle emotional signals that people constantly communicate without words. A person's body and emotions tell stories all the time. Comfort tells stories. Distance tells stories. Relaxation tells stories. Trust tells stories. And the people who understand this usually discover something others spend years searching for. The goal was never learning secret techniques. The goal was never forcing attraction. The goal was learning how to pay attention, because attention changes everything. Most people remember how someone made them feel long after they forget specific words, long after details disappear, long after individual moments fade. Feelings remain. And maybe that is why the strongest connections often seem mysterious when people look back on them, because nothing dramatic happened, no perfect moment, no magical formula, just two people slowly becoming comfortable enough to stop pretending. And sometimes that quiet process creates something stronger than fireworks ever could. Because in the end, attraction is rarely about making someone run toward you. It is about creating a space where they genuinely want to stay. What becomes interesting as someone continues observing human behavior is that attraction and closeness often have very little to do with isolated physical moments. Most people think connection lives only on the surface, inside visible actions and obvious expressions. But the reality is usually much deeper than that. A person is far more than a physical form, because the body itself often carries emotional memory, comfort, insecurity, and vulnerability that quietly respond to the way someone is treated over time. People remember experiences even when they do not consciously realize they are remembering them. They remember who made them feel judged. They remember who made them feel invisible. They remember who created pressure. And they also remember who made them feel accepted without needing to earn it. Imagine a woman sitting beside someone after a difficult week. Maybe she has been carrying stress from work, family responsibilities, or internal battles nobody else can see. Outwardly, she may appear perfectly fine. She smiles, she talks normally, she acts like everything is under control. But beneath that surface, emotions often move differently. Human beings carry hidden tension all the time. This is why emotional connection becomes so powerful. Because sometimes what another person is truly responding to is not a specific action itself, but the emotional meaning attached to it. A slow and thoughtful gesture can sometimes communicate admiration and appreciation more strongly than endless words. Not because the action itself contains magic, but because intention changes everything. People feel the difference between attention and routine. Routine says, I am going through familiar motions. Attention says, I see you. And being truly seen is rare. Psychologists have long noticed that emotional safety changes behavior in subtle ways. When people feel safe, they become more expressive. Their voice softens. Their body language opens. They laugh more naturally. They stop calculating every response. Without realizing it, they begin allowing parts of themselves to appear that usually stay hidden. There are certain vulnerable areas of human experience, not just physical spaces, but emotional spaces too, that require trust before they are revealed. Insecurities, fears, personal dreams, quiet doubts. The parts of someone they may not usually expose to the world. And trust becomes the permission that allows those walls to slowly lower. Not instantly, not dramatically, gradually. Because real intimacy is usually not built in one night. It is built in hundreds of moments where someone repeatedly proves, "You can be yourself around me." A man notices this while spending time with someone he cares about. In the beginning, conversations stayed simple. Questions remained safe. Everything felt predictable. But as time passed, things changed. The conversations became deeper. She started sharing stories from childhood. She spoke about fears she rarely mentioned. She admitted things she normally kept private. And suddenly he realized something. People reveal themselves in layers. Nobody begins at the center. Everyone begins at the surface. And every layer underneath requires greater trust than the last. That is why connection cannot be rushed. People often try to skip emotional steps because they become impatient. They want closeness immediately. They want certainty immediately. But emotional closeness does not respond well to force. It grows naturally when both people feel understood. Sometimes reassurance requires no words at all. Even something as simple as a steady hand placed gently on someone's lower back during a stressful moment can communicate support and emotional presence. It can quietly say, "You are not alone right now." Not because of physical contact itself, because human beings constantly communicate through emotional signals beneath awareness. Support, protection, presence, care. The body notices those things long before the mind explains them. And perhaps this is why people often remember feelings more than events. Years later, they may forget the restaurant, forget the conversation topic, forget the details. But they remember how they felt beside someone. They remember whether they felt calm, whether they felt accepted, whether they felt safe enough to stop pretending. Because real connection was never simply about proximity. It was never about finding secret formulas. It was never about perfect moves. It was always about understanding another human being deeply enough that they no longer felt alone in your presence.